Yesterday they seemed to be caught off guard. There wasn't a lot of police when this protest outside the CFMEU headquarters began. The riot squad were eventually called in and rubber bullets were used to disperse the crowd. I have to say, once again, it looks like the police will not hesitate to do that and use any force necessary to disperse the crowd, and certainly they have already given them a warning. That was that tense standoff we saw this morning between the protesters and also the line of police. And then it was at about 11:30, protesters just decided to leave and march towards Parliament House. We were pushed back behind police lines by the police, and now we just have Parliament House office in the distance. So we will be there. We will be there soon, but certainly we were pushed back behind police lines because all this police have marched from the other side of the city. From the other side of the city, they've marched all the way to Parliament House. So it certainly seems like police did not have an idea that that was going to be the protesters' move. So they've basically just moved location, but they will have this standoff once again, and the police will be asking them once again to disperse because they are breaching Chief Health Officer's orders.
Absolutely. Christina Hearn, we will leave you there for the time being, but we will stay across this story for the rest of the day. But let's move on now. And children as young as 5 may soon be able to get a COVID vaccine in some parts of the world. Let's go live to Federal Politics reporter Jonathan Kersley, who is in Canberra for us. Jono, what has changed?
Morning, Lizzie. Pfizer and BioNTech announced overnight the vaccine works in children aged 5 to 11. Children involved in their trials were given a smaller dose, around about a third of the amount given to everyone else. And the study showed after the second dose, antibody levels were just as high as those in teenagers and young adults who received the normal dose. The next step is for Pfizer and BioNTech to go to the US regulator for approval for that age group in around about the next month or so. Here, it's already approved for age 12 and up. Children under that age have not been factored into the rollout at all yet. Pfizer would have to apply to the Therapeutic Goods Administration for approval. Then the Vaccine Advisory Group, ATAGI, would also have to rule before over 5s could be included in the rollout. Some epidemiologists say 5-year-olds could be getting the vaccine here by the end of the year. The opposition says the government needs to have a plan to vaccinate children.
We know that these vaccines are coming through. They're being run through in trials at the moment for younger children. It's inevitable, in my view, that we'll be vaccinating 5-plus-year-olds by year's end. So you need that whole population because the vaccines are leaky.
We need a plan for paediatric vaccines when it's available and when it's approved.
Lizzie, vaccination of young children is also not factored into the national reopening plan. That's based on 70 and 80% of the population aged 16 and up being double jabbed.
Jono Kersley there for us in Canberra. Well, next we'll head back to Melbourne for more on that breaking news where construction workers are protesting against mandatory vaccines. Let's go back to that breaking news in Melbourne this afternoon where there has been a tense standoff between members of the CFMEU and police on the streets in the CBD. Christina Hearn is there for us on the ground. Chris, bring us up to date. What is happening now?
Well, Lizzie, we're just walking with the protesters. They're now making their way down Burke Street, so just past the intersection of Russell Street. And the police are following them, and this has been basically a game of cat and mouse with police because this all started at CFMEU headquarters over the other side of the city near Queen Victoria, opposite the Queen Victoria Market. Then these protesters, after police moved in with their riot gear, protesters took off to Parliament House. The riot police moved in again, and protesters are on the move once more. Because of that, the mounted police, foot officers and also the riot police once again had to follow them. Where they're going, we don't know. One thing is for certain is they are carrying a very strong anti-vaccination message. They are furious that the Andrews government has mandated vaccinations in the construction industry, which was to come into effect on Thursday. But after those violent protests outside CFMEU headquarters yesterday, as of last night, the government has shut down the construction industry for 2 weeks. But that has only angered these protesters even further. We've had chants of sack down Dan Andrews, no to the jab. It's all very anti-vaccination. So we just keep on walking with them down Burke Street. I suppose we just don't know how this is all going to end. We don't know where the protesters are planning on finishing, or even if they know. They certainly are causing quite a lot of chaos in the streets. We just have to be careful. They're very hostile towards the media. Already a colleague has been assaulted quite seriously by some of these construction workers. So we're trying to bring you as close as we can, but also keep our distance a little bit, because certainly there is quite a bit of hostility towards the media, certainly police as well, but the Victorian government is their #1 target. They are certainly increasingly angry at the mandate to have vaccination in the construction industry, and then of course #2 now, the fact the construction industry has been shut down for 2 weeks at an estimated cost of $2 billion.
Yeah, certainly has escalated. But Christine, any idea of numbers? I mean, we've been looking at a chopper shot earlier. It does look like the protest has thinned out, but perhaps that's just because they're now more spread out on those streets in the CBD. Any idea of numbers? And secondly, what is this doing to Melbourne CBD at the moment? A number of streets would have been closed to traffic.
Well, it's absolutely causing chaos in Melbourne CBD. The only saving grace, I suppose, is we're in lockdown. So there isn't the workers that you would normally see in the CBD. There isn't the amount of traffic you would normally see because of the lockdown. Nonetheless, these are major streets we're on. I'm just passing the corner of Swanston Street and Burke Street. So this would normally be full of trams. All the trams have had to, of course, be stopped because of this protest, as they make their way now through the Burke Street Mall. As I mentioned, we don't know where they're going to finish, but no trams obviously can run up along Burke Street while these protesters are going. I did see the mounted police further ahead, so it does seem like sections of the mounted police have left Parliament, and they have now moved to the other side. To see where these protesters are going to end up.
This has very been much a moving protest this morning. I mean, when police first arrived, they did issue that warning to the protesters. They said, leave now or force may be used. Have we seen any of that yet, or is it just this sort of building up of numbers and tension on each side? Have we seen any arrests?
We saw one arrest very early this morning. This was when there was just a handful of protesters. Police came over to the small handful of group, warned them to leave, warned them they were breaching the Chief Health Officer's orders. He didn't move, so they arrested him. But since then, we haven't seen direct clashes with police or that violence that we saw yesterday. Certainly, things are very heated. And I'll just flick the camera around. You can see the police now once again following the protesters up Burke Street. So it is a game of cat and mouse now between the police and protesters, but this is causing absolute chaos in the city. One thing I can tell you, Lizzie, is that these police came prepared. It was about 9:30 this morning, half an hour before the protest was scheduled to kick off, and there was a busload of police that came and formed a line outside CFMEU headquarters. That was followed by the riot squad and also the mounted police. So unlike yesterday, where it appeared that they were caught a little bit off guard and the riot squad moved in late and fired those rubber bullets to eventually disperse the crowd, police have been in numbers ready for this protest this morning. The one thing they might not have been prepared for, however, is the fact it has become a moving protest. Every time they seem to form a line in front of these protesters, the protesters move once again and they're forced to follow them. So you can see all the police now marching down the Burke Street Mall. Just an extraordinary scene that we're witnessing here as they chase these protesters once again. And I'll just go to the other side. It appears that the protesters now might be taking a left turn, but once again, the police will be following them. And I suppose they just simply have to catch up with them and see what they're going to do. This, to remind people, we are, of course, in a lockdown. It is illegal to leave your home unless it is for an essential reason. And certainly that is something that these police officers have been warning these protesters throughout the morning, warning them if they don't move, they will use force. And here they come once again after the protesters. But I dare say once they catch up to them once again, the protesters will be on the move again. But as you mentioned, Lizzie, it does seem to be thinning out, although that could just be an appearance as they take different streets towards their different destinations. But I dare say police will, once they get to Elizabeth Street, they'll be turning left, I think, because that is where I saw the bulk of the protesters go. And that, of course, is towards Flinders Street Station. So maybe that's their next destination. We simply don't know whether they whether they had this all planned out or whether this is just something they're making up as they go along, the protesters, that is. But police are certainly having to be very, very dynamic in their response.
Christine, I think you described it perfectly when you said it was like a game of cat and mouse. Let's go live to Neri Tai now. She's at another area of the protest. Neri, where are you and what is happening on the ground where you are?
Hi Lizzie, yeah, sorry. We're just on Elizabeth Street at the moment, and it sounds like, it looks like the protesters are heading towards Flinders Street Station. You probably heard from Christine a short time ago that we're not clear about where they're heading at the moment, but we did see them march towards down Spring Street towards State Parliament, where they were met with a massive police presence there. So at the moment they've made their way through Burke Street Mall, and they're now heading towards Flinders Street Station. And I'll just take you around this side here. That's a wall of police there at the moment. So usually with protests in the city, there's a bit of a plan about where they're heading and what they're doing, but it seems like the workers are now just heading towards Flinders Street Station is what we can see. A number of flares were being also lit in the last couple of minutes as well. You can see them sort of heading towards the station there, and they're sort of chanting and getting louder and louder as the day goes on. It started at 10 o'clock this morning, and I can tell you that the crowd has been growing ever since. We'll just have to be careful. We're in the middle of the road here as well. Lizzie.
Now, Neri, where you are, have you managed to speak to any of these protesters? I mean, we know that they are anti-vax. That set off the first wave of protest. Then, of course, came the construction shutdown for 2 weeks, which has
At this stage, we've only seen a few bottles being thrown and firecrackers going off, as well as flares being lit. We haven't seen any violence between protesters and police. Obviously police are getting ready for possibly a repeat of what we saw yesterday outside the CFMEU headquarters, where it really escalated around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. That's when the riot squad was called in, and rubber bullets was used to disperse the crowd.
Yeah, clearly police don't
So
want
now we're
a
just
repeat of what we
heading
saw
down
yesterday. We are just looking at some shots now.
Elizabeth
This is
Street.
from earlier on in the protest. We can see flares being let off, and the sheer number of protesters who've taken to the streets today. There we've got a flare being set off by one protester. A lot of them are wearing high vis, a lot of them are wearing work boots, but as we heard from Christine Ahern earlier today, it is unclear exactly who these protesters are or which groups they are from. But yeah, these are some shots from earlier today of the protesters on the move. We've seen them at a number of locations today. They started off at the CFMEU headquarters in Melbourne CBD. They were told by police, leave now or force may be used. So they set off on foot. They then ended up at State Parliament House, which is on Spring Street in Melbourne CBD. There was a bit of a standoff there with heavily armed police as well as the mounted police. Then they were on the move again up Burke Street, and it's believed at the moment they are heading to Flinders Street Station. Whether this is part of a plan or whether this is just being made up as they go along the way, that is yet to be seen. But we will stay with this story throughout the day. All of the developments from the ground there in Melbourne's CBD. This is a live chopper shot at the moment. It does appear like they are approaching Flinders Street Station. If we just go out a little bit, that does appear where the protesters are heading, the front of the pack heading there towards Flinders Street Station, their third location for the day, and we'll just have to wait and see what happens once they get there, because police have said it is illegal for this protest to go ahead. It is illegal for anyone to be congregating in any large groups. Melbourne, of course, is in lockdown. This protest is illegal, and police have said that they will use force if they have to. They do not want to see a repeat of the situation we saw on the ground yesterday. Very ugly scenes indeed. We will stay with this story throughout the afternoon. We'll have more on this breaking news coming out of Melbourne CBD after the break. Returning to breaking news out of Melbourne now, where CFMEU protesters have gathered in their hundreds along with a strong show of police. Let's go live to Neri Tai, who is on the ground in the protest there. Neri, where are you and what is happening?
Well, we're just here on Elizabeth Street at the moment. The protesters have just marched onto Flinders Street. A number of these trams had to be stopped as well. There were delays on Elizabeth Street as hundreds of protesters marched basically from State Parliament to this area here. They were met with hundreds of police officers at State Parliament, including the Mounted Branch as well as the Riot Police as well. But now they're heading down Flinders Street. We'll probably start walking down there as well. We don't know where they're going, whether they're doing another loop around back to the CFMEU headquarters. But this has been a big operation in the city. It's been going on for 2.5 hours now. We're not clear where they're headed at the moment. But we haven't seen any violence yet between protesters and police at this stage. We've seen bottles being thrown, we've seen flares being thrown as well as firecrackers as well. But at this stage, no violence from the protesters at police.
Okay, Neri Tai there for us on Elizabeth Street in Melbourne CBD. Christina Hearn is at another part of the protest for us this morning. Christine, you've been there for a couple of hours on the ground. What is happening where you are?
Lizzie, we're following the protesters once again. I'm on Flinders Street, so Flinders Street Station to my right. And there's a lot of police just guarding the front of Flinders Street Station. That's where the mounted police have gone. But if you flick the camera around, this is where all the protesters have gone. They're walking down Flinders Street Station. So police again are going to have to regroup and follow them. The big question is where their final destination is. We don't know. The one thing, however, is as this protest has been on the move, it does seem like numbers have dissipated somewhat, but that also could be just the appearance of it as they take different streets. Now they seem to be taking another turn as well. So we don't know where these protesters will end up. Maybe at where it all started, at CFMEU headquarters. That, of course, is where we saw those violent protests yesterday. That is where scores of police were ready this morning for the rally. They certainly had a face-off with protesters, but that is when protesters took off on foot. We've basically done a loop of the city, and from what I can see, Lizzie, it's not over yet. One thing is for certain, this has caused chaos in Melbourne this morning.
Christina Hearn there for us in Melbourne CBD. Certainly is a situation which is very much still unfolding on the streets of Melbourne. It started at around 9:30 this morning when a strong showing of police showed up at the CFMEU headquarters about half an hour before. Hundreds of protesters claiming to be part of the CFMEU, dressed in high-vis and boots, and they took to the streets. There was a standoff there. They then went on the move, heading to State Parliament on Spring Street. The protest then up Burke Street, and it appears that that protest is still moving around the streets of CBD, causing chaos on its way. We will stay across this story throughout the afternoon, and we'll bring you all of the details in 9 News at 6 o'clock. I'm Lizzie Pearl. Have a great day.